It's Becky. I am back with a video today for you guys that I've been asked about several times. I didn't want to just put it in a Q&A response video and kind of get it lost in the shuffle. So I wanted to make it its own video. So if you have asked me this question, this is the video answering it for you. But basically, I wanted to kind of share my testimony with you guys. I've been asked about it before, and I've talked briefly about it before, and then I was asked about it again. So I wanted to just take this time to make this its own separate video. I don't have a big grandiose story. I didn't have some big epiphany where I found God and became a Christian. I didn't have anything monumental that happened that I was on the wrong path and I found, the right path. Nothing like that really happened. I was raised in a Christian home, and we were raised Christian. We went to a Baptist church pretty much my whole life, and it was just something that was instilled in me from a very young age. And that's not to say that you can, that gives you an easy out and you're just an instant Christian, because obviously you still have to make the right choices, and you still have to get to the path that leads you to being saved and all that stuff. So ultimately it was still up to me to make that decision. And I made it pretty early on. I think I was around 11 when I was baptized. And I told my mom, actually, it's funny because I mentioned to her that this question had been asked of me several times. People have asked me about my testimony. And I said, I don't know what to say. It's boring just to tell my story because there's nothing that exciting that happened. And she said, that's not true. Because you were raised with it and because you were saved so early on in your life, you've had a very long life of being a Christian and a very long life of a very long time of being a Christian and trying to make a lot longer of a time to be making the right choices. And I guess that's true, so I had my mom to thank for that. I didn't really think of it that way. So just because I don't have a story where I was on the wrong road and things were going bad and then I found God and Jesus, that doesn't mean my story is any less important. But being that I was saved when I was about 11, that does not mean that my life was perfect. I still made plenty of mistakes. I still sinned a ton. And of course we'll continue to, because I'm not perfect. I think the hardest time for me in my life was in my early 20s. And I think pretty much like everybody, you make choices that are wrong. And being that I was already a Christian and I was already saved, I knew that I wasn't making the right choices all the time. But I did continue to do it anyway, which I think a lot of us do. And you justify it in whatever way you want to kind of clear your own conscience. Ultimately, you still know what's right and wrong, and I knew what was right and wrong. I continued to make the choices that I made. And it didn't last very long. It was a very short period of time. I think it was just kind of my, I don't know. I think it was my terrible twos that came out way too late in my life. Like I said, I was in my early 20s. Nothing crazy and serious. I mean, it wasn't anything life-threatening or anything like that. But just things that I knew were not right, things that I was raised to believe were not right, and you make those choices and you have to live with the fact that you did that knowing it was wrong. I think the important thing, though, to take away from that time in my life was the fact that I came back to making the right choices. I came back to finding God and Jesus and apologizing for my sins and intending to not do those things again, which I didn't. And then continuing on down the path that continues to lead me towards God and Jesus. That's really the most important thing, I think. Finding them, but then also knowing that when you stray, they're going to be waiting for you when that's over and when you find your way back to them. That's what's important, finding your way back. So that really is the takeaway from all of this. Again, there was no huge thing that happened. There was no aha moment where I was, it was something that was ingrained in me from the very beginning. My parents kept God and Jesus in our lives. We were in church a lot. And just being able to see them as good examples of good people, just good people in general, whether you're a Christian or not, doing the right thing, being honest, being fair, being trustworthy, all those things that make up a good Christian also can just make you a good person. So those were all the things that I was shown growing up. I think once I had kids, my faith grew even stronger, because you realize the love that God and Jesus have for us, because you realize the love, because you have this incredible love for your own children. And you want them to, if you're a Christian, your goal is ultimately that your children will be saved and go to heaven as well. And that you can lead them by not only teaching them verbally, but also leading by example. And I think that's important too, to make sure that I am setting the best example that I can for my children. And I think growing up too, it was funny, I've had people tell me multiple times that they knew I was a Christian without me having to say a word. it was because they could tell how I acted. They could tell that by the choices that I made. They could tell by the language that I chose not to use. They could tell by the company that I kept. You know, I kept myself away from situations that might lead to trouble. And all those things that people could tell from me without me having to say a single word. And I was telling my girls the other day, I said, I think that's one of the most important things about being a Christian is not going around and waving it. No, you're not ashamed, and yes, you're proud to say you're a Christian and you follow God and Jesus and all that stuff, but I think it's equally as important to be an example that people don't even have to ask you. They can just tell. They can see the love of Jesus through you. They can see by the way that you act and the way that you interact with other people and the way that the life that you live, they can tell that you're a Christian just by that. And that in itself is a good example. That in itself is a testimony. Without saying a word, you are testifying to the people around you that you are a Christian and you believe in God and Jesus and you're saved, and that's important. Without saying a word, they can testify to their friends. They can witness to their friends and the people around them by just being living out an example of a life of a Christian and as close to Jesus as we can possibly be, which is hilariously far away from Jesus. There's no way we could ever get remotely even close to the life and the perfection that Jesus has and lived. But doing our best to live out a life that would make Jesus and God proud is really your ultimate testimony. That's really my ultimate testimony, and that's why you will never hear me say a curse word. That's why you will not really ever see me talk about anything inappropriate. Sometimes I might share a little bit too much information, but it's never from an inappropriate place, if that makes sense. And that is my testimony that I live out every single day, and I still make mistakes, and I still sin, and I'm going to keep making mistakes, and I'm still going to sin, but I can do the best that I can do to stay true to myself, to not only go out and vocally be able to be a witness to people when I feel they need it, but also being able to live a life that speaks for itself and that testifies and witnesses for itself without me having to say a word. And that's especially important when you have friends or people that you see a lot that maybe don't believe in God and Jesus, and as long as they see you living the life that you should be living as a Christian, then that, you never know, that might open the doors for them to finally realize that they want to talk to you about maybe God or Jesus or questions that they have about salvation. All those things that you might not feel comfortable coming up to somebody and saying, hey, do you want to go to church? Or hey, do you know God or Jesus? Or hey, do you need to be, you may not feel comfortable saying those things to those people, but if you live the life that as a Christian you should ultimately be living, that makes you more approachable, and that makes you an example of what Christianity should look like, and a life where yes, we all sin, but we're all forgiven, and we continue to try to make the right choices when we mess up. That is my testimony, and that's really the testimony and that's really the testimony that I want my children to tell. I want them to tell when they grow up to their children that they were raised in a Christian home and their mother and father did everything they could to make sure they knew all they did about God and Jesus. And God and Jesus were always a topic of conversation. They were the top priority in the family. They, with us being homeschoolers, we bring God and the Bible into our daily homeschool life. So I want God and Jesus to be just as present in our life as any other relative, anybody else that is important to us, that we love, that we respect. I want them to be just as much a part of our lives as any person that's here on earth. And that's why we keep God and Jesus in the conversation and try to bring in biblical teachings to them whenever it relates to something that's going on in their lives. I think that's important. That is the testimony that I want to live, and that is the testimony that I want my kids to have when they grow up, that they have the same story, that yes, they were saved early on when the time was right for them, obviously. And of course they continued to make mistakes, but they never got so far away from God and Jesus that they could not find their way back. And like I said, that is the ultimate thing, is finding your way back, because we're not all perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to stray. But being able to find your way back, that's really, really what matters. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit more insight. Again, it's kind of a vague story because there really isn't a huge one. But I think it just gives you an overall picture of what kind of Christian that I want to be and the type of children that Christian children that I'm trying to raise. And then there's just the example that I want to be in my life. If you have any questions, let me know. Make sure you subscribe if you are not already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.